Okay, so Sonic Superstars is the Sonic game of all time. Plenty of people like it, others hate it, but I kind of sit in the middle. This game has some glaring boss level issues, but are they enough to hold the game back from greatness? Kinda, yeah, a little bit. As usual, we'll be going in sequential order and covering all of the main levels of the game. We aren't talking about fruit, and we also aren't talking about anything at Trip Story, because if we did, all of these levels would go down an entire ranking. Trip Story is just the same levels with obnoxious enemy and hazard placement, and the final boss is somehow even worse than the regular boss. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get started with Bridge Island Zone. Actually, first we're going to talk about the hub world because this thing sucks. It's slow, it breaks the flow between levels, there's nothing to find in it, the music is an 8-second loop. There's nothing that this hub provides that couldn't be handled better in a menu. E tier. And it's not like I'm against hub worlds in Sonic or anything, I liked the Sonic Advance 3 hubs. This is just pathetic though. Anyway, Bridge Island Zone isn't a bad first level. It's basically Green Hill, again, but white. Act 1 is pretty simple, only having a couple of gimmicks. One of them is this vertical half pipe in the background where you hold up to get to the top. I don't really like these because they just feel kind of clunky. The other ones are these launchers that appear in later levels as well. I do like these. They're basically faster versions of the cannons from Oil Ocean where you jump into one and it spits you out in a specific location. These feel fast though, so they're cool. The first mini-boss is basically the SA-1 whale chase sequence. It's all spectacle and holding right, but you can fall into the water where the fish jumps at you and instantly die. So that's cool. Love missing one jump in level 1 and having to respawn. Maybe I'm just spoiled by Sonic Mania's very conservative approach to bottomless pits, but this just sort of rubs me the wrong way. Act 2 I like better than Act 1. It cuts the weird half pipes and focuses more on making a level that just feels fun to play. They don't really replace the half pipes with anything else besides this one ring that gives you like 1,000 rings, but they do focus more on jumping between the foreground and the background, and that's pretty fun. The boss though, I do not like this guy. He's basically just if you took the first boss from Sonic CD and made it last 2 minutes. It's not great. I actually don't think there's a single good boss in this game, so expect to hear this opinion a lot. They'll be holding these rankings back quite a bit. Overall though, this is a pretty decent first level. I'll give it a B. Speed Jungle is good. Act 1 throws a lot of gimmicks at you, from the vines that launch you up, to the purple grapple switch thingies, to the tunnels from Sonic CD, and the vines that you grind like Tarzan. It's a lot, but they're pretty cohesive outside of the weird purple grapple switches. Not really sure what they were cooking there, but at least they're inoffensive. The mini-boss does also use these purple grapple things, so if anything, they might exist to have a cohesion with the boss, which is neat, but this boss it's nothing to really write home about. This zone has the first character act, where you're forced to play as a specific character. In this case, Sonic. I like this act on paper because it throws a lot of gimmicks from the previous act at you, but with the added threat of Fang causing trouble. But what I don't like is that Fang's music is vastly inferior to the actual stage music, and you hear it from most of the stage. I also don't like that this level relies on an instant death beam, which means that simply missing a jump forces you to go back to a checkpoint. I was gonna say cost you a life, but fortunately those aren't in this game. I mean, it's possible that their absence is what caused them to think bottomless pits and instant death beams weren't so bad, and I hope that's not the case, but overall I appreciate that we don't need lives. Anyway, aside from the annoying music and the instant death rate that we hopefully never see again, I do like this act and how it flows. Act 2 is also good, but I wouldn't say it's as good as the first two. Mainly, it's just that the butterfly gimmick isn't great. It's not the worst, there isn't actually a timer on the butterflies like in some games, but regardless, it's just kind of an inconvenience. The boss here is the weightiest wait fest I've ever waited for in my entire life. If this level didn't have this guy in it, I'd probably give it close to S, like really high A tier, even with the insta-kill Fang death beam. It's still some good Sonic, but then this dude just drops it by a whole grade by himself. You just stand there, and then you make him hit himself with his arm, and then you just watch him throw a temper tantrum, and then you hit the blue missiles back at him. It is nothing. Also, I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of the whole hit the right missile to hit the boss trope. It was a gimmick in one mini-boss of Sonic Mania, but you'll definitely be seeing it again in this game. It's fun once, and even then I'd say the Mania boss that has this is not one of the best ones in the game, but at least in Mania, there was the challenge of the fact that you were constantly running, and you had to like track the missiles, and you had to work with the game's physics in order to actually do it right. But in this, you just kind of like watch him shoot a missile, and then you hit the right one. That's it. Even with this boring boss though, I'd still give it an A tier. I don't want to say they're peaking early, but this might be the best level in the game. Okay, Sky Temple. There are a lot of gimmicks in this level, a couple of which don't really make sense for a Sky level, like why is Breakout here? What's up with these platforms? Also, what is this? Is this the only tiny rock that causes this animation to play?
No
it's so
way.
odd. Also, spin dashing breaks it, so it's like a very niche animation for people who specifically aren't rolling, and it plays for like half a second, and it just reads so weird. I don't get it. I actually don't dislike any of the gimmicks presented, but the fact that they're all in a relatively long level and the zone only has one act, it feels like it was meant to be 2 acts, one peaceful and one in the storm, but something got cut. On paper, this is a negative thing, but this also means that I don't have to fight an Act 1 boss, so actually this level's pretty good. I'm gonna stop harping on this unless it gets egregious, but I really don't like the boss in this one. It's so repetitive. You fall through the sky, you hit him, jump on blocks, you hit him again. And each time you have to wait like 15 seconds for him to slam his controls for a while because he's an angry little gamer. Even with this annoying boss, this level is still a B tier because there's only one of them. That's pretty cool, and the level itself's pretty fun. Despite the most generic name for a Carnival pinball level ever, it's the most explanatory thing of all time. I actually really like this zone. I know it has a lot of blueprints to work off of, so it's not exactly saying much, but I feel like this zone is the most actualized level in the game. As in, it feels like they had an idea and they accomplished it well. Usually pinball levels in Sonic are a bit more meandering, but this one keeps its focus on speed and momentum on top of the fun pinball gimmicks. The launchers go well with the paddles, and I like the coins that you have to go through to get more rings. It makes earning rings feel more rewarding than just rolling slots like in other casino/carnival levels. For me, Act 1 is good, but Act 2 is also really good. The roller coaster section is obviously kind of cheap, and it leans a bit more into some Sonic Advance style level design, which isn't exactly my taste, but they do give you plenty of warnings that you have to jump before they kill you. So that's nice at least. The reason I like this zone so much is that it's one of the only ones that has a drastic aesthetic difference between Acts 1 and 2, and it still feels cohesive. Like, yeah, Bridge Island changes to Sunset, and Speed Jungle has the dark sections, but they don't really change much visually. There are a couple of stages later that do change substantially between acts, but I'll get to them. Pinball Carnival changing from a happy carnival to a spooky carnival just works for me. They even go so far as to give the badniks little ghost sheets because they're spooky now. And there's spooky spider webs and trees. Come on, you gotta admit this is cool. Plus, the one new gimmick they add, the fire, is super easy to understand, and they don't do anything with it that hurts the flow of the level. Even the bosses, outside of waiting on them to throw their temper tantrums, are surprisingly not bad here. They use gimmicks you've seen throughout the level in ways that rely on you being good at the game to take them down. It's just good. Easily my favorite level so far, and most likely in the whole game. And the music is good, which usually goes without saying, but the soundtrack is a bit hit and miss, as we'll see later. Do I dare put it in S? I mean, just because a ranking is there doesn't mean I have to use it. I guess the question would be, would I play this over any level in Sonic Mania? Because that game is S after S after S. And honestly, yeah, I think I'd pick this over a couple of Mania levels, but I wouldn't consider those S tiers, so I'll keep it in A. However, let the record show that it's very close. Lagoon City, or as some people say, Lagoon City. This is another pretty good stage. Act 1 is fun, although it's a little short for my taste. There's a big focus on water slides, which does make the level feel a bit automated. I appreciate that the aesthetic of this act makes me feel like I'm in a level designed by whoever designed that beach and mermaid aesthetic in hotel bathrooms, you know, like the one in the Goofy movie. You know what I'm talking about. Act Amy isn't bad, but it leans into what I just said about Pinball Carnival. Outside of the fruit everywhere, the aesthetic is basically identical to Act 1, which would be fine if Sonic 3 and Mania didn't exist to show how different acts could be while feeling cohesive, so this just feels a little cheap. Hitting the fruit around is fun though, and Amy's interactions with Trip are cute, even though this whole last section carrying Trip around is not fun. Act 2 sure is a water level. It's fine, but it's carried hard by the music. The music is so good, but the level itself it's alright. The soundtrack really does peak here, and it makes that slow water gameplay more tolerable. If I see this bubble slow down my water level one more time! I do like these little green icons that you go through to get rings. They're pretty neat. But aside from that, it's just a water level. If you have the cyan emerald at this point, then you can swim better, but you know, it's not really required. Most of the emerald powers are kind of forgettable and not super important, but if you're not able to find a water bubble, this is a good alternative. And it's also really good against the boss. Speaking of the bosses, not gonna take too much of your time, the Act 1 boss is a jellyfish. It's not really that exciting, you just hit it when it stops being covered in electricity. The Act 2 boss is just the Sky Temple boss again, but underwater. If you don't have the blue emerald, then you're not gonna have a good time with this one. Especially on the last section, because the last section has these currents and they rely on you to use them in order to actually get up to the top, and it is just a bad time. Just use the blue, this is where I say get the cyan. Either get the cyan or get the blue emeralds because you just want an emerald power to get through this as fast as possible. This is not a good boss. So it really drags down Lagoon City for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a C. Sand Sanctuary, yeah. Another one act stage, and I won't keep you waiting this time. This one is also a C. Despite having some fun gimmicks like the bouncy snake and the speed lines, sure, let's call them that, the stage is held back by having an incredibly long and boring boss. And touching on the last level as well, I know you might think it's harsh to rank a level so low because of a boss, but you have to think about it like this. It took me 3 minutes in this level to get to the boss. The boss itself took 3 minutes. There's no second act in this one, so that's it. 50% of this level is just standing there watching Eggman sit around in the background. It's not good. Boring, in fact. And like, I do appreciate that they use the gimmick found earlier in the level where if you hit the moles as they're jumping at you, they fly into the background. But they take something that seems like a funny little animation and makes it mandatory. Also, this stage brings back this guy! So yeah, C tier. Press Factory. This stage is the one I mentioned earlier where Acts 1 and 2 are distinctly different, but the ideas just don't work very well. Starting with Act 1, you have to watch the background and some environmental effects to know when the big piston in the background is going to slam down and make everything bounce up. I'm actually fine with this idea on paper, but there is a huge missed opportunity here. Like, if only there was some loud, always present sound that had some sort of timing and rhythm to it, and you could match the timing of that sound to the piston in the background, and it will play throughout the entire level that wouldn't rely just on visuals. If only there was something you could match the timing of. In all seriousness though, having an entire level timed with the music would have saved this gimmick, and would have been reminiscent of other platformers like Mario and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, where they have entire levels, multiple levels in the whole game, that tie to music seamlessly. Unfortunately, we don't get that, and we get one of the most grating songs in the game, so we get the worst of both worlds. Also, they brought back this stupid boss. I know Mania brought things back too, and they brought this back as well, but like, come on. Nobody likes it now, nobody liked it in 1991, and it just feels lazy. Adding a monkey that you have to hit to slow it down even more just makes it worse. Act 2 starts with the factory blowing up, which is a lot like Oil Ocean and Mania, and throughout the level a timer ticks down that you have to press a switch to reset, a lot like Oil Ocean and Sonic Mania, and Spannondorf. The difference here is that if the timer reaches 0, you just lose. Even if you press the button during the lose animation, you still lose. Compare this to Oil Ocean and Sonic Mania, and Spannondorf, where one drains your ring slowly and the other one just summons some little ghosts to attack you. Way more manageable than try again. On top of that, the gimmick makes no sense. The drone following you around directly in the middle of the screen is pretty ominous, and it continues the idea of Act 1 where you have to keep an eye on the background at all times, but at the same time, it just kind of sucks me out of it. Why is there a drone keeping track of all this? You could say, it's just a video game, but I want a little bit more cohesion than that. Why is the factory turning itself back on? If it was a bomb that you're resetting the button of, that makes sense. That is an aesthetic thing that makes sense. If there's like a self-destruct button that is about to happen, that makes sense. But the way that it looks like the factory is just broken and it's turning itself back on and it's like, you know, going haywire. But then why is it turning itself back on? It's just, it doesn't really make any sense. And also, why are these rockets placed in the level that explode into fireworks at the end like you did something crazy? You just got into a rocket. Like, sometimes it's fine not to have these weird flourishes, because this part really feels like there's nothing to it. If the rocket flew into the background and blew up the drone, and then fireworks happen, that would make sense. But here, the rocket just flies into the air, and then that's it. And yeah, you did it. It's just weird. Conceptually, I do like the idea of escaping an exploding factory, but it just doesn't stick the landing for me. And also, this boss is boring too, and can just one-shot you. D tier level, not great. Golden Capital. I hate this level. E tier. Cyber Station. This is a good level overall. I like that they turn you into voxels to match the cyber aesthetic, and I'm just messing with you, I'll talk about it, but geez, man. This level is like if they threw a bunch of ideas into a blender without any thought. Cohesion? What's that? This level is another pinball level, but with an El Dorado aesthetic, but also there's lava, and the badniks are fish and bugs, and and there's this weird gravity mechanic too, and a drill out of nowhere. And I don't even know what this music's trying to portray. It just sounds like someone made a song in the Genesis sound font and they just slapped it in here. Look, on paper, this is neat, kind of like boiling down New Super Mario Bros. 2 to one level. A whole level based on gold is not a bad idea. But this level, especially Act 1, isn't just based around gold, it has all these other gimmicks that I mentioned bogging it down. Even the boss is a cool idea, but annoying in execution. It's a giant piggy bank that steals your rings and gives them back to you as you hit it. But it uses the annoying gravity mechanic, so it really just relies on you using your blue emerald power to just call it a day. You just press the blue power, you run around, and then it dies. And I know this could be said for like 99% of the bosses in the game, but I'd rather examine their actual designs and say, honestly, it doesn't matter what their design is because you can just use the blue power. Act Knuckles is also not very good. It cuts down on the gimmicks significantly and really only has the pinball gimmicks added with some gliding and wall climbing stuff for Knuckles, but it's just sort of boring. At the very least, it realizes its idea without getting it its own way better than Act 1. Act 2 is terrible. Like, it's so bad it would drop any of these levels into E tier for me if it was attached to them. The level itself is harmless, but still has the boring pinball issue of the last level. It just has an auto-scroller now, yay! But no, the real issue comes from the boss. If you played this game, you knew where this was going. I hate this boss. It takes way too long, the boss music is a 40-second loop, it's an auto-scroller, and everything is placed in cheap ways to make you lose your rings before you can even actually hit the boss. And even he has some scummy attacks to make you lose your rings, like when he just appears in the bottom right, and you're on a platform, so you can't go below him to hit him, you can't jump to hit him, you have to like roll into him, and it's like, what is this? And something worth noting, the sound design here is especially dreadful. Like, this is honestly a problem across most of the game, especially in Golden Capital, but this boss in particular made me take my headphones off. The platform makes a floating noise the entire time, so on top of hearing the most boring boss music of all time, you also hear constant ringing for 3 minutes. And if you, I don't know, die on the final hit, you have to go through it all over again. Also, why is this factory-style boss here and not in the factory level that we were just in? It's bad. I hate it. Can we just move on now? Cyber Station. This is a good level overall. I like that they turn you into voxels to match the cyber aesthetic, and they bring back the speed lines from the Sand Sanctuary and recontextualize them into cyber lines, data lines, well, whatever they're called, they work. There are a couple of annoying bottomless pits, and these transformation sections are more weird than actually annoying, but I do still like it. The boss isn't that bad either, although for some reason you just don't bounce off of him when you hit him early. That's weird. I actually really appreciate the fake out though, and I like that the boss has its own remix of the stage theme. We don't get that often enough in Sonic games. A few cheap sections hold this back from being really good, but I'd still say this is a B. It's not bad. Frozen Base. Probably the most forgettable level in the game, to be honest. The music is nothing to write home about. It has the exact same problem as Golden Capital, and the aesthetic is just another mechanical level, but this time there's snow. Act 1 has the conveyor belts from Quartz Quadrant where you can change the direction, and near the end there's an avalanche section where Eggman's base is rising from the background. The boss is a pterodactyl. There's not much to say on this one. Act Tails is just more of Act 1, only with more vertical orientation because he can fly, and a lot more areas where you can get crushed. Also, as a side note, this is probably the best Tails has controlled in a 2D game because you can actually speed up your descent. No more floating awkwardly down, you can just go down. The level itself is kind of boring though. Act 2 is basically an entirely different zone. I don't know why to side here because this level is a Fantasy Zone reference. It's cute, but it's also not Frozen or a base, so I'm not sure how to rank it compared to the rest of Frozen Base. Honestly, even though it's very simplistic, I do prefer this to something like Sky Chase as far as actually playing it goes. I've always felt like walking around while on top of the airplane has just felt a little bit awkward, even if the idea is cool. And both Sky Chase and Mirage Saloon Act 1 just kind of feel weird because of that. It just they don't feel great. And plus you can always spin dash off of them and kill yourself. It's so weird. It's weird that it doesn't just hang out below you. I don't get it. I got off topic, but overall this zone is still a C. Even with this kind of fun little minigame thing, it's just sort of forgettable. Egg Fortress. This isn't an awful final level until you know it is, but as far as Act 1 goes, it's fine. The fact that the base is falling apart already when we get here, it feels like we're missing some sort of Act 0 where we destroyed everything, but regardless, this level, like I said, is fine. The gimmicks are all very Final Sonic level, with gravity and lasers and cheap enemy placement, and this path that doesn't load until you jump, killing yourself because for some reason this game forgot it was a Sonic game. You know, normal Sonic stuff. The Act 2 gimmick is actually really neat though. You play through the level you just finished backwards, because for some reason Eggman has a time control device? Okay. Recontextualizing a level like this is pretty cool though. It's a shame that it leads to a horrible boss that I hate very much. The final boss of this game is boring, cheap, and wastes your time. I do not like it, nobody should like it. I feel like they designed bosses this way to avoid what I said earlier about using emerald powers to just clean up any boss, and if that's the case, I'd rather just not have emerald powers. They don't add enough to the game to make up for these bosses. They also could design them this way because of the multiplayer, because, you know, if you just have 4 Sonics all hitting this dude at once, he needs to have some invincibility frames, otherwise he'll die in 4 seconds. So it's like, I get that, but then I'd rather just not have multiplayer. These bosses really just hold the game down. Anyway, Eggman is in the background and he shoots rockets at you. Seem familiar? It should. You just hit the blue one back at him again. You do have to get behind him though, because he'll block it with his arm if you're on the front, and even his little shoulder pauldron thing will just block it because it's a shouldered armor. He'll do other attacks in between, but most of this phase is spent just running behind him and just looking for that blue rocket to hit back. The second phase is a chase phase just like the final phase of the Sonic 3 final boss, and it also sucks. You just run away until he makes himself vulnerable. Also, if you fall off, you have to do the whole first part over again, and this boss takes like 7 minutes. It really bogs down the whole level, but I don't hate it as much as I hate the Fang boss, so it's a D. I mean, actually, if we're, ranking the Trip final boss alongside this, we'll give it an E. That boss is just this one, but worse in every single way. But like I said, we're not counting the Trip rating, so this is a D. Anyway, the real final boss is a dragon. Not a robot dragon, not Eggman controlling a dragon. It's just a dragon. Is this the teaser that you were supposed to, like, get out of this? Like, is this, are we supposed to question, what's this purple rock doing here? Is that it? Like, there's nothing in this game except for this one part in Act Knuckles where you see it in the background, kind of, and then he just pops up. This is possibly the worst super boss of all time in any Sonic game. There's just so much waiting around until you can do something. It's the epitome of Sonic Superstar's boss design, and it's bad. Especially because you have to play through all of Trip's story to unlock it, and her levels are all substantially worse than the main game. E tier, not worth it. I give it an F tier. If I had an F on this list, it is bad. Don't even bother. So yeah, this game starts off strong and really fumbles it in the second half. This is probably why people overall feel pretty down on the game. They experienced all the fun halfway through the experience, and the rest of the game becomes a chore. It's a shame because I like the idea of having more classic Sonic games, but if they can't figure out a way to make the whole experience fun, I'm not sure how they'll manage to keep getting people excited for new ones. I have heard that time attack is pretty good though. I haven't really bothered to try that. I haven't really messed around with it all that much, but the idea of playing these levels without bosses honestly makes them all seem way better. So, I mean, if you have a way to download a completed save file and just play time attack, I think that's probably how I'd recommend playing this game as a whole. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can see if I peaked early on or if I can manage to keep making my videos fun so you can be excited for new ones. Also, what other games do you want me to talk about? I'm not limited to just Sonic games. I have a couple of non-Sonic games in the process right now. So if there's other games that you want me to check out and you think that you want to see a video like this on them, let me know. Leave a comment. And thank you for watching.